Hope everyone had a nice holiday and hasn't reneged already on their New Year's resolutions. But if you trust God and make that a commitment, you won't fail this year. Let's turn to 114, or you can follow on the screen. It's different words to a familiar hymn, and I didn't realize it till I started looking at it. So anyway. Question, what is that hymn? Nobody knows it.
Too many different words.
A church has one foundation. That's right. Well, I get the bonus point this morning. Let's turn to no, that's the wrong one. Oh God, our help in ages past. Why don't we stand for this one? This is a great song to stand for. Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Before the hills in order stood,
Dear Heavenly Father, I want to lift up these requests and that were mentioned today, that we could be an influence on those that are new to our church and those that haven't been coming. Reach out to them. I know Stacy, his friend Rocky's in the hospital. Or she's actually in hospice now, not doing well. Be with her and her family through her time. As well, that wasn't mentioned, is Fran. Be with her and her family, that they can make it through their trials. You know what's best for them as well, and all these others that were mentioned today. Be with us through this week and this new year, that we make resolutions to have you in our life, that you can better it and You know what's best for each one of us. Be with our kids that are part of this church. Help us just not to leave people out, that we include everybody. We ask these things in your precious name. Amen.
On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast no wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, come and go with me. I am bound for the promised land. When shall I see that happy place and be forever blessed? When shall I see my Father's face and in His bosom rest? I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, come and go with me. I am bound for the promised land. Thank you.
Well, Happy New Year. Many of you, I saw said that to you last night, but for those who weren't able to be at last night's program, I just want to say it again, Happy New Year and Happy Sabbath. We think about New Year and this time of year, and for me, it's kind of bittersweet thinking about the change, because last year was familiar. It was something I knew. It was something I've experienced, and I know how to handle last year now because I'm at this point. But this is a new year, and what kind of things are going to happen? What kind of experiences are we going to have? It could be challenging. It could be exciting. We just don't know. And so here we stand with this brand new year, a kind of a fresh page. Maybe if you do journaling, it's like turning that page, having a blank page, or starting a new journal for the new year. And what kind of experiences will we have? Well, we don't know, but we'll find out, won't we? But thinking about that and the uncertainty of the year, it also got me thinking about God and the certainty of God. The title for today is A Brand New Year, but the Same Incredible God. And the good news is that when we study God's Word and we look at it, that the one who was there in the Old Testament and the New Testament is the one that is here with us today. And that's good news, especially when you study the promises. Now, I've recently been reading through a couple of textbooks for a class that I was taking last summer, and I had some book reports due, and one of the textbooks was written, it's Old Testament Theology by John Kessler. And I'm reading through his book, and he was helping us work through, as students, different aspects of the Old Testament. And one thing he pointed out, which I hadn't seen before, was something that he terms as promise theology. Promise theology. Now there's covenants and there's promises. And while many times we lump those together, he pulls them apart and talks about promise theology different than covenants. And it was through looking at those studies this week, or the last few weeks, that got me thinking about the promises of God and how we can have certainty in the next year coming up because of who God is. Now, Malachi 3 verse 6 gives us some encouragement. In Malachi 3:6, it says, "For I am the Lord, I do not change, therefore you are not consumed, O sons of Jacob." I like that. I like that certainty that God says, I don't change. I'm the same. You can count on it. And as we study the promises of God, we'll discover that certainty for our lives today. Well, let's think about promise theology. How does John Kessler define that? He looks at promise theology this way. He says, these are things that God has spoken to humanity that are future-oriented. When he gives these things and sets up these agreements with humanity in promise theology, it's future-oriented. Something God is going to do, a promise that God is going to fulfill, something yet to come. Also, we find that in promise theology, you can study not only the promise that God gave, but then the response of humanity to the promises. Did they trust him? Did they go along with the ideas? Did they believe what he said? And are they willing to, and are we willing to order our lives believing the promise that has been given? God's people are called to make choices in the present that demonstrate their certainty that the divine promises will be fulfilled. Well, let me give an example of how this works before we really get into the Bible. Let's think about a real tangible thing in our lives today about promises. Let's say between two friends, one friend promised another friend that when I move, and I'm planning to move soon, when I move, I'm going to give you that antique bookcase that I have in my living room. I know you've mentioned you really liked it. I'm not going to be able to take it with me, and I needed to give it to somebody. So I'll tell you what, when I move, you can have the antique bookcase. Now, part of the promise that makes it real is the fact that the person who is giving the promise has to, in some way, be able to fulfill it. You have to believe that they have the capability to fulfill it. And you know that they have the bookcase, and you know they have the capability to fulfill it. Well, how would you respond then, knowing that you've been promised the antique bookcase? Well, you may make choices in your present life that reflects the fact that you believe you're going to get the antique bookcase. Such as, let's say you were going through Craigslist and you happened to notice that there was another antique bookcase for sale on Craigslist, and it was a really good deal. Without the promise of the one for free coming from your friend, you may have bought that bookcase on Craigslist. But because you believe the promise, then you pass by that opportunity for a good deal, believing that you're going to receive the one from your friend. You see how that works? Promises and how we would respond to it. Maybe you would think about that and you'd say, wow, I'm going to get this beautiful antique bookcase. I know what it looks like. I've seen it. Maybe you will make choices on other pieces of furniture that you buy for your study or your living room that would complement the bookcase that's coming. And so you'd say, well, I know what that bookcase looks like, and now I'm picking up this desk or whatever it is. I want to make sure that they're going to match. You see how, because of the promise, and if you believe it, you would order your life and your choices to fulfill that promise, knowing that that promise would be fulfilled and expecting it. Well, how does that work then with God? Sometimes with humans and humanity, we're not always as trustworthy as we could be. I know as a parent and as a dad, there are times that I make promises to my sons and I'll say, you know, we'll try to accomplish this next week and we'll try to pull it off. And I had that happen here this week. Early last week at Christmas time, they got a video, a DVD from Disney, a Disney movie, and they said, Dad, we want you to put it on our iPods and our iPads so that we can watch it. And I said, okay, well, sometime the week after Christmas, we'll sit down and we'll try to get that accomplished, and you can help me with that. Well, I was reminded here at the end of the week, Dad, you never did that. When were we going to do that? And I said, well, I'll try, but now it's Friday, and I'm not sure. We'll try to get it some point here before school starts. I had to move my promise. And they knew it, and they remembered it, and they called me on it, right? And sometimes as humans, we let people down. But I'm grateful for the text in Numbers 23, verse 19. Numbers 23:19 tells us that God's not human. And that's good news when it comes to the promises. Now, I'm going to read from the New International Version. Usually I use New King James, but I like how NIV put it this way. It says, God is not human that he should lie, not a human being that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? And of course, we know the answers to that. When God promises something, he fulfills it. Now, occasionally there are conditional things. I remember, for example, the story of Jonah. And you might remember he sent a message with Jonah that says in 40 days Nineveh will be destroyed. Obviously, there was a message of hope because those in Nineveh converted and the city was not destroyed. It's not that God had given up on his promises there. There was something behind the scenes. He was looking for a response, and when he received it, the punishment did not come. So those kinds of things where there's conditional prophecies, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a promise that says, God says, I will do this, and he never fails on his promises, especially when it's on our behalf. Genesis really gives us a great opportunity to study the past. And because the book was Old Testament theology and promises there, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the Old Testament today. Let's look at Genesis, some of the promises that were given there, and how God fulfilled them. And the first one is found in Genesis chapter 8. Well, it's not the first promise in the Old Testament, but it's the first one we're going to look at. Genesis chapter 8. Verse 20 is where we begin. This is after the flood, after Noah and his family had been in the ark an incredibly long time. I've been complaining to people about how cloudy it's been the last few weeks, but I can't imagine what it was like for Noah and his family to be in that ark as long as they were, with water all around them. It must have been a difficult time, and finally the waters recede, the trees and the grass grows again. Noah is able to come out of the ark, and this is his response now. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean animal, every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. Now let's pause there for just a second and look at this. And then he makes a promise. Oh, I'm sorry, here's the poetry part. Verse 22, here's the poetry. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So he makes this promise. And now it says that it's in his heart. But let me ask you, what conditions were there that humanity had to meet to receive this promise? What conditions were set there for humanity to meet to receive this promise? There are none, right? In fact, God even so identifies there in verse 21, he says, I will never curse the ground again for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. He says, I realize that humanity has not changed because of the flood. He says, I realize that there is still sin in the world. It has not been done away with, even though the flood slowed it down for a time. And he says, yet I will make this promise. And in this promise, there was no action required on humanity's part for it to be fulfilled. He says, I will not send a flood to cover the ground. The waters will cover the earth. It will never happen again. Chapter 9 and verse 11, it's repeated again. A little bit different way, same promise. Chapter 9, starting verse 11, thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for a perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud. and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, or my promise, which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And then 17, and God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. So God says, this is a promise I'm making. You can count on it. You can plant seeds. You can plan to harvest. There will be continued life. I will not do this again with the waters. And so he makes this promise. But what was humans' response? Humanity. How did they respond? Well, there were some things that God asked them to do. Not as conditions for the promise, but he does ask them to do something when they come out of the ark. And if you look at Genesis 9 verse 1, right between these two promises, God does ask humanity to do this. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and do what? Replenish or fill the earth. Spread out. Occupy the land. This is something that God asked humanity to do. But it wasn't a condition for the promise. He just said, this is what I want you to do. But humanity did not respond to that. In fact, they wanted many to reject God and reject his command. And so when you look at Genesis 11 and verse 4, notice what is happening to a big group of people. Genesis 11 verse 4. A group of people have moved away from the mountains where the ark was settled out into the plain. And it says, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. What you find in that verse is a group of people that said, we're not going to trust in the name of God. We're going to make a name for ourselves. Let us clump together because God told us to what? Spread out. We're not going to follow God. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to clump up together. And now notice what happens. When they disregard the command of God and they start pushing them out, then they no longer trust the promise. Because in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 119, it says this also. The dwellers on the plain of Shinar disbelieved God's covenant that he would not again bring a flood upon the earth. And so one object before them in the erection of the tower was to secure their own safety in case of another flood. You see what happens. As they pushed God out of their lives, and as they didn't follow the commands that he asked them to do, now they can't trust his promises. They think that he's going to renege on his promise, and so they're going to build a tower that some of humanity might survive if another flood were to come. Interesting what happens to our responses to promises that God gives, depending on where we have God in our lives. Now, not all of God's promises are unconditional in that sense. There's a big one that comes next here in Genesis chapter 12, that with Abraham. Now, Abraham, it's an interesting story, and between the Tower of Babel and Abraham, you get Shem's descendants and this genealogy played out, and you see all of these people begotten so-and-so and such and such. I did some math here last week, and I discovered that Shem was still alive when Abraham was living. If you notice how old Shem is when he dies, and you notice how old each of these men are when they have their firstborn sons, and you do the math, you'll discover that Shem is still alive when Abraham is alive and making his way. And so there is a real direct connection still. One generation, you could go to talk to Shem about the flood, who was there. So there wasn't a big disconnect, and yet idolatry was taking over the world. You see this call of Abraham to come out of idolatry. And so Abraham here is given a promise in chapter 12. Chapter 11 also tells us it's Abraham's father who leaves Ur with his children, with his adult children. They move up to Hebron, but they kind of stall out there for a little bit, and that's where Abraham, or Abram, is when God calls him. Now here's his promise. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This is a change from where God had at first been focused on all of humanity to now we see the storyline change to the focus on the descendants of one family. And the descendants of one family through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the children of Israel, you now start following a storyline that is very specific with how God is interacting with this group of people, but they were never meant to be exclusive. God never intended for his people to be exclusive away from the world. He always wanted them to be inclusive, inviting the world to come and join their family. And we'll see that in just a little bit. We're invited to be a part of Abraham's family. And we find the promise also includes the Messiah who would come through the lineage of Abraham. So here's the promise. Abraham, I'm going to give you a new land, and I'm going to give you a great inheritance of children and family, large family. Here's the promise. But did it come with conditions? Right in the promise, there's conditions, right? Abraham has to take some actions, doesn't he? If he wants to experience the new land, what does he have to do? He's got to go there, right? I've got a new land for you, but Abraham has to pack up and he's got to move. He's got to take some actions. He's got to abandon some things. What does he have to abandon? What does he leave behind? Oh, that's hard. He had to leave behind friends and family to be able to benefit from this promise that God has given. Sometimes, when we've been living a life and then God calls us as Christians or calls us into a church, sometimes it means that we have different friends than we used to. And sometimes it's even hard to get together at Thanksgiving and Christmas because you're living a life that's different now than what your family and friends are living. And it's a little bit awkward and it feels uncomfortable. And sometimes that happens. That's a reality. I've worked with people who have been excited about the Bible and about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I'll talk to them and share with them about what we believe, and they see it and they say, "I want to become a member of your church. I want to be a Seventh-day Adventist." And I say, "That's great. That's wonderful." And they study and they begin living that life, coming to church on Saturdays instead of Sundays, and some of those changes. And usually it goes well until they go home at Thanksgiving time. And then they go home and they visit with their friends and family, and they come back and they're very confused and they're frustrated, and it's hard to make those changes. Have you ever experienced that, or have you known somebody? Maybe you have. Abraham here for this promise is called to take some actions. Now, there's a number of things that he has. One, we'll discover, knowing Abraham's story, that he's going to be called to wait patiently for the promise. That's going to be hard to do for him. He's 75 years old when he gets this promise, and 25 years later, he's still waiting to see that firstborn son. It's hard for him. He's called to wait patiently. He's called to follow God's directions. He's called to make life choices that are difficult. And the reality is for this promise to be fulfilled in his life, action must be taken in order to receive it. Sometimes God makes covenants with his people, and it's not a promise about the future, but rather it is a response to what God has done in the past. When the children of Israel come to Mount Sinai there after they've been brought out of Egypt and out of slavery, you might remember that when God gives his commandments there, he begins with, I'm the Lord your God. I'm the one who did what? Freed you from slavery. And so he starts with that. That's how the Ten Commandments begins, with a reality that it is a response to what God has already done in the past. Now, before you get hung up too much there about the commandments being just at Sinai, I'd like to point out that they were actually in the Genesis narratives. The commandments are really a response to our Creator God. When we come into existence because of God who created us, it begins with, these are my commandments, and you do it out of response of the Creator God. And he also adds, because he's also freed us from slavery. But it's a response. Those covenants are things for what God has done in the past. Faith, though, is trusting in the promises of what he is going to do and living our lives today believing what he's going to do in the future. You see the difference? One's a response to what God has already done, but faith is taking action for something that God will do. In the book Education, page 296, and Sherry got a little devotional calendar, one of these things that's set on the desk and flips. It came from Remnant Publishers, and they have a little quote from Ellen White and a little quote from the Bible. And so I was giving her a hard time because I gave this to her for Christmas. And it was January 2, and she hadn't gotten it out on the desk yet. I said, why don't you put your calendar out on the desk? She said, I just haven't had time. I said, well, here, let's do that. And so I opened it up, and on the second page there on January 2, it had this quote, and I'm like, wow. And she's like, wow, that's what you're going to be talking about this Sabbath. I said, I know. It must have been meant to be that I was going to see this. Here's what it says, the little quote. Whatever Christ asks us to renounce, he offers in its stead something better. Do you believe that? Whenever he asks us to give something up, friends, family, location, something to that effect, he always offers us something better. You know, if we didn't believe it, it would be almost impossible to follow God. I don't know how we could do it. How could we grit our teeth and do it if we thought we were exchanging something good for something bad? I couldn't do it. I'm too weak. But when we really understand that God's watching out for our best interests, and if he asks us to give something up, he's going to give us something better. I believe that's an important thing to keep in mind. Well, there are times where we have doubts. Abraham had doubts in Genesis 15. I told you he was promised this when he was 75 years old. Even then, it's maybe a little bit up there in age for a child, but now in Genesis chapter 15, he's getting even older. And so God comes to Abraham. It's still Abram at this point in a vision. And it says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Basically, he's saying, the closest one to the head of the household is not any of my children, but my trusted servant. He's had a child. Maybe his son is going to be the head of the household. Then Abram said, verse 3, look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. And then verse 5, which we talked about last week, then he brought him outside and said, look toward the heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And now verse 6, and he, Abram, believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. God said Abram was righteous because he believed in the promises and was going to order his life towards that. Well, Abram's not perfect at this point because he makes some serious mistakes as you read through his story. But at this point right here, it says Abram trusted God and God counted it as righteous. That's what God's looking for us. In Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter, you discover a commentary about Abraham and others who trusted God. Hebrews chapter 11, starting with verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. See, that's what faith is. Believing the promise and taking action today, believing that God's going to follow through. Look down at verse 6. It says, but without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Part of the promise theology and promises is we have to believe that the person who's going to give us that promise has the ability to fulfill the promise and will follow through with it, is honest enough to follow through. God, when He makes a promise, has the ability and is faithful. He will follow through. Verse 8 of chapter 11 goes on to say, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him, speaking of God, faithful, who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. And I guess that's the part where we benefit from the stories in the Bible. Because we can look at the promise that God gave, we can look at humanity's response, and where humans were faithful and where they followed and trusted in God's promise. We also get the benefit in many places to see that God was faithful. He did fulfill His promise. And indeed we see that in Abraham's story. In Galatians 3 verse 26, it tells us though something else. In Galatians 3, 26 through 29, how do we fit into the pictures of the Old and New Testament? It says, for you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. The promise of the Messiah is ours when we believe in Christ. The promise that, if you remember in Hebrews, even though Abraham arrived in Canaan, it said he dwelt in tents because he was looking for yet a better land. That promise is ours too. Jesus said He would come back and receive those who are His friends, who have trusted in Him, who have put faith in His promise. He will receive them, and He's prepared a place for us to go, a better land. God is not slack concerning His promise. There's a number of writers in recent times, great writers, who have followed the promise theology and written it into their stories. C.S. Lewis is one who wrote a series of Chronicles of Narnia. And the very first one, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, storyline. If you've read that story or if you heard the storyline, you might remember that there's a character named Aslan, the lion, who comes into the storyline, and all the way through the first half of the story, all of the creatures are looking forward to the day that Aslan will come back and banish the white witch who had brought always winter and no Christmas to the land. And they were looking forward to Aslan coming. And finally the story builds and builds until finally Aslan comes, and he makes a difference by sacrificing his life in behalf of those who had violated the laws of the land. And it broke the spell of the white witch. Or maybe you've read the story from John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, where a young man named Christian finds out that there's a celestial city that he is to journey to. And at first he's carrying this great burden on his back, and the progress of his story as he comes to the cross, and then as he comes across difficulties and sometimes loses his way, but then comes back on path until finally he arrives at the celestial city. Sometimes in his story he lost sight of that city, and he became lost and then was brought back again. We as Christians at times become discouraged, but never give up on the promise of God. 2 Peter 3, starting in verse 9, says, even during those waiting times, those periods that we're waiting, and we're waiting now for Jesus to come back, don't give up on God. You see, the Lord is not slack concerning His promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to His promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found in Him in peace, without spot and blameless. The promises of God in the past that He has fulfilled gives us confidence that the promises that are yet to come, we can count on it. This text calls us today to order our lives, to make decisions now that reflect the fact that we believe that His promise will be fulfilled. How will that be in 2015? What decisions will we make as we hold on to the promise that Jesus is coming back? With all of its possibilities and problems in the next year, we can find peace and hope in a consistent God who has kept and will keep His promises. Young people, we've got a special story for you right now. And so I'd like to invite you to come forward, and as you do, if you'd collect the offering for our building fund. And I've seen a box setting up here, and I don't know what's in it, but I think there's something special planned for you, so I hope all of our young people will come forward at this time.
I'm so glad all of you kids could be here today. I'm really happy to see you on the Sabbath morning. The story I'd like to tell you today is about far away in the land of Africa, about a little boy named Swami. Back in those days, students that wanted to learn about Jesus and also learn school would come and live in missions. And when they lived at the mission, they could go to school and they could learn about God, and they lived at the school while they were doing that. Well, Swami was a great athlete, and he was really fast. Do we have anybody that's really fast here? Anybody fast? Oh, right. Yeah, I see some very fast ones. And the Swami was very fast, and he was not only fast at running, but he was also a very fast swimmer. Well, one day he and his friends were down on the bank of the river. Have any of you been down to the Illinois River? And do you remember what it looks like? Do you remember the Illinois River? Not far over here. Well, He was down on the bank of the river, and he was swimming near the bank with his friends. Well,
I got fish there.
you got fish at the river?
Yeah, I got
I don't know if he got any fish there, but he was swimming, and he was there with his friends, and they were swimming and having a great time, and the missionaries had always told them, don't ever swim too far out in the river because there's crocodiles, and one might come and grab you, and so he was not supposed to go out. But his friends started saying, Swami, I bet you can't swim across this river and back again. And Swami says, I bet I could. And they started to tease him, and they started to make fun of him, and they started to say, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it even if you tried. Well, Swami said, oh, yes, I could. I'm a very fast swimmer. And he decided that he was going to swim across that river. And they said, well, what if a crocodile starts to come after you? Swami said, well, I can outswim any crocodile. I'm a really fast swimmer. So Swami started to swim across that river, and he started across, and he got about a fourth of the way across, and he took him a while, but he got about halfway across, and a few minutes later, he was about 3/4 of the way across. And they saw that they thought he's going to make it to the other side. They started to get excited. And sure enough, Swami made it out on the other bank, and he climbed out of the river. And the boys all jumped and cheered, and they waved, and Swami waved back, and he was so proud. He was so proud to have made it to the other side of the river because nobody had ever swum to the other side of the river from the mission before. Well, he was pretty tired, so he had to get out and sit down for a while. And he sat down and he rested because it was quite a long swim. Well, after a while, they said, come on back, Swami, come on back. It's time to go. Well, Swami said, well, I'm fairly well rested. I think I'm going to get in the river and swim back. So he started swimming back. And he swam and he swam, and he was about a fourth of the way back, and all looked good, everything looked good, and he was swimming, and he was a really strong swimmer, and he kept coming, and he was about halfway back, and he kept coming, and he was getting closer and closer to making it back to shore, when all of a sudden, the boys on the shore, they looked, and they saw something that looked like a floating log, except it had eyes. And they said, oh no, it's a crocodile. And sure enough, it was a crocodile. They said, look out, Swami, look out, there's a crocodile. He's right there behind you. And Swami looked over his shoulder, and sure enough, the crocodile was getting closer to him. So Swami started really swimming super fast, and he was giving it everything he had. And for a little while, it looked like he might outswim the crocodile. But all of a sudden, there was a big splash, and there was a snap. And the crocodile grabbed Swami, and it started to roll. Well, Swami didn't know what happened because he became unconscious. He blacked out. And the kids on shore, they said, oh no, he's been grabbed by a crocodile. And so they got really scared, and they ran back to the mission. They told the missionaries, Swami's been grabbed by a crocodile. He swam to the other side, and he was grabbed by a crocodile. And the missionary said, oh, we've got to immediately start searching for him. So they went out into search parties, and they started looking up and down the banks of the river. And as they looked up and down the banks of the river, they would call, Swami, Swami. But they didn't hear Swami answer. Well, Swami, in the meantime, he woke up, and there was mud, and there were sticks, and there were rocks all piled on top of him. And he had been pushed down into a crocodile's nest. And he was still alive, but he couldn't move, and he couldn't move his legs, and he was stuck. And he said, oh, I'm never going to make it out of here alive. So he started to pray to Jesus. He said, dear Jesus, please help me. I'm stuck in this crocodile nest, and I don't know if I'm going to live. Please help me, and I will give my heart to you. And then he stopped praying, and he heard something. What was that? Somebody calling his name. And he said, help, help, I'm over here, I'm over here. and he heard some footsteps, and they started to get closer, and they started to get closer. And the search party found him, and they pulled off all the mud, and they pulled off all the rocks and the sticks. And they grabbed Swami, and they took him back to the mission, and they gave him some medical care. And you know, Swami got much better, and he gave his heart to Jesus. Now, boys and girls, we don't have to get caught by a crocodile to give our hearts to Jesus, do we? We can give our hearts to Jesus today, can't we? And that's the good news that we have. Well, I do have a reptile here for you today. I'm fresh out of crocodiles, but I've got a bearded dragon, and this is one that I keep in my classroom at school, so I hope you'll come visit me and see them. I have 3 of them, and this one's name is Spiky, and it's female. Mason, would you take Spiky out and let the kids take a look? She eats all kinds of things. She eats grasshoppers and crickets, and Spiky eats fruit and vegetables and all kinds of things. But Spiky is a female, and she's you can pet her if you'd like. You can come right on up and pet her, and she's got a nice long tail. And look, she looks kind of fierce, but she's really sweet and nice. And you can see that she has claws and scales like all reptiles do. And she's a little bit cold because she gets her body heat from the sun. And when she gets too hot, she gets into the shade to cool down. But you can take a good look at her. She's in the lizard family, Lacertilia. It's a suborder of reptiles. And she's a really great pet to have. The kids really like to hold her, and they like to pet her at school. Oh, you like it? Wonderful. Look underneath her chin. She's got a nice dewlap with spikes on it. And sometimes she'll push that out when she's feeling territorial, and she'll push that dewlap out so everyone can see. And she says, "This is my space." Isn't she nice? And she lives with another female named Nina. They live for about 20 years. And so they live for quite a long time, and I've had my other 2 since they were babies. But this one I got when she was an adult. She needed a home, so I took her. And she'll eat strawberries and kale, and she eats crickets. And she's really a nice one, huh? Anybody else want to pet her and take a look? Good choice. All right. Everyone make sure everybody gets a pet. She's a nice one. Okay. Be gentle. Be gentle. She feels rough. Every now and again she sheds her skin, and that helps her to get rid of parasites, and when she grows a little bit bigger. And look on the side of her. She's got her ear holes right here. There's, see there? That's her ear right there. Oh, you need to see it too. Well, let me bring it over here so we can. Oh.
What?
She's nice. Don't worry. She won't bite you.
She's asleep.
Isn't that nice?
Oh, no.
You can see her claws and her toenails, and she has a nice long tail if you'd like to touch it. You want to touch the tail? Sure. All right. All right. Well, has everyone had a chance to pet? Has everyone had a chance to pet her? Okay. Well, if you've had a chance to pet her, you may go back to your seats. Thanks for coming up and listening to our story today. Are you all right?
For closing song, following hymnal, it's 572, He Keeps Me Singing. There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still, in all of life's ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know. Lord, for your grace, for your mercy, for your love, for Jesus. Thank you, and dismiss us now from this place, but never from your presence. Amen.
I had a story I wanted to share with you. I've been sharing it with everybody I can to get them to sit still long enough and listen. And now I got a captive audience. December 6th, last year. Ron, I'll have you show that video in just a minute. Let me set it up. I had some friends I've known for years. Clint and Shirley Cornett, they own CNS Pawn in Springdale. I bought antique guns from them because I like old guns. So do they. And they're an interesting couple because they're Cherokees. Their business is all family run. Their children and grandchildren work there. And Clint officiated high school football games. And even up until I think he was 74, he would start running up to 5 miles a day to get ready for the season. And so I've known this couple. They're very devout, religious, conservative people. And they're not shy about their faith or their political beliefs. And so we had a lot of fun talking and visiting. And on December 6th, while I was down in Prairie Grove pretending like I was going to get in a gunfight with a bunch of my Yankee buddies down there, Shirley got in a gunfight with two hoodlums that had came from California. They drove up from Fort Smith to Springdale looking to knock over a pawn shop, and they picked theirs. Okay, will you run that?
Two suspects are in custody after police say they robbed a Springdale business at gunpoint Saturday morning. According to police, the owner of the shop shot one of the suspects. 5 News reporter Ellen Thalls has the latest on this story.
Take a look at surveillance video from an attempted robbery at CNS Gun & Pawn Shop Saturday morning. Police say the owner, Shirley Cornett, pulled out her .38 revolver and shot one of the men attempting to rob her store. They say 25-year-old Marcus Gould and 20-year-old Leon Robertson were carrying semi-automatic pistols. Police say they are in custody. Gould is recovering from the gunshot wound in his arm at Sparks Hospital in Fort Smith, where Robinson drove him after fleeing the store. They say they arrested Robinson after he came back to check on Gould. He is behind bars at the Washington County Detention Center on a $250,000 bond. Police say both men are facing attempted capital murder and aggravated robbery charges. Records show Robertson has had several past arrests for robbery, burglary, and thefts. Both of the men are from California. We did speak to the store owners, Clint and Shirley Cornett, Sunday night, but they declined to go on camera. Clint told 5 News his wife is still very shaken up. He says she was hit by the bullet. Gould fired back, but it didn't break the skin. The books in front of her saved her life. The owner did say this isn't the first time an incident like this has happened. He said 2 years ago their store was robbed and said shots were exchanged in that incident as well. Police say it appears Shirley was the only employee who fired a weapon and say at this point it appears it was self-defense. They say the case is still under investigation. In Springdale, Ellen Thalls, 5 News.
Robertson is
That's good. What you missed when you first time you watched that is
Get in front of the mic. Can't hear you.
what you miss the first time you watch it is that the guy with the black hoodie. Okay, I went in and visited with the daughter and visited with him after the holdup about a week later. And they were all smiles. They were all working. And the daughter told me that the grandson behind the counter, the red guy leaning over the counter, was trying to execute him. He leaned over that counter while the kid cowered on the floor and kept trying to fire his gun at him. But the gun wouldn't fire. Now, this isn't just some piece of junk gun. It's a Glock. Now, listen to this. Shirley had a J-frame Smith & Wesson that holds 5 .38 special rounds. They had 2 Glock 17s that hold 17 rounds in the mag and 1 in the chamber. Okay, so they had 36 rounds. She had 5. But it doesn't matter. It's just like with Gideon. He had 300, they had 30,000. They were so high when I went in to visit with them. Not just because it was before Christmas and they were selling stuff hand over fist, but because God had made them bulletproof. Now, when that guy that tried to kill that kid 3 times, when he swung that gun around and fired at Shirley, it fired. When he shot at the display case to try to get some of the jewelry, it fired. It fired whenever he aimed it at something other than one of them. Well, he couldn't hit Shirley anyway. She got hit by a bullet that hit a pile of books in front of her, but that's not what saved her life. God saved her life. God made them bulletproof. I wanted to share this with you because when I went in and visited with them, they were high on the fact that they were God's children and He had once again protected them. So instead of suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and all this stuff and all these nightmares and all these horrible dreams in your mind, continually replaying it, they were high on the fact that God had made them bulletproof. Their time had not yet come on this earth, and until that time came, nothing could take their lives. And now I shared it with you guys.
Amen.